Hello and welcome back to Something Z, and welcome to If Deku had Venom Part 1. And because there's nothing to say, let's jump into the video in 3, 2, 1. So we begin this what if when Izuku was in his last year of middle school, and everything from Bakugo bullying Izuku to Izuku being called Deku is the same. But just recently, a meteorite landed in a nearby forest, and inside the forest, scientists discovered this black goo, and they still haven't figured out what it is. But they put it inside a nearby public lab that had a science exhibit, which the teachers decided was a good field trip location. So around a month later, Izuku's grade went to the science exhibit, and there Izuku got to see a bunch of different rocks and meteorites from space. But unknown to the public, the black goo was able to escape, because it was able to break through the glass that was containing it, because even though they were doing experiments on it, they still haven't figured out that it was alive. So it then began to crawl around to find a way to escape, and after some time it was able to get to the public science exhibit. But before it could figure out a way to escape, a boy with green hair got flung towards him, and he lands a couple feet away from it, on his back. And seeing that it needed to hide, the black goo went inside the kid's jacket, because the kid's jacket was the same color as the black goo, and it was able to easily hide. Then Bakugo and a couple more people appeared, and he told Izuku that he was a nerd, and that if he focused his brain on his own life instead of some stupid rocks, then maybe he would be able to see that he was nothing. And after laughing with his friends for a bit, Bakugo and his friends walked away. And shortly after that, Izuku picked himself back up, and he continued on with the trip until an hour later when the teachers told everyone to get back onto the bus. And throughout this whole trip, the black goo was still attached to Izuku's jacket, not moving, so it was unnoticed. And when Izuku got home later that day, he put his jacket back into his closet, and he went back into normal clothes. And when Izuku went to his living room, the symbiote began to explore its new surroundings, which was getting a decent reading on who Izuku was as a person, just based off what he saw. So now we skip to that night, and while Izuku was sleeping, the black goo came out of its hiding spot, and it crawled over to Izuku's bed, and when he was able to get to Izuku, it began to cover Izuku from head to toe. And when that happened, Izuku's dream went completely black. And after looking around for a couple seconds, two giant eyes that were as big as Izuku appeared right in front of him. Then a giant mouth with many pointy teeth appeared in front of Izuku as well. Then the giant face began to tell Izuku about the Clintar, and how it was a race of symbiotic creatures that took over hosts, and that it was a race of symbiotic creatures that took over hosts. Then when he was done talking about the Clintar, it began to explain its own past, and how it was from the meteorite that fell about a month ago, and how it got to Izuku. Then when he was finished with his story, Izuku asked what did that have to do with him, and why not just take control of him then find someone else. And in response, the face told Izuku that it just wants to survive, and have a host. And it told Izuku that it was able to read his mind the moment they bonded, so he knows what he really wants, which is to become a hero more than anything. So if they work together, they can get what they both want. And if the black goo just randomly appeared from person to person, people would get suspicious in just one person having a black goo power. Then in front of Izuku, a hand appeared that was around the same size of Izuku's hand. Then Venom asked would it accept the deal. And hearing this, Izuku began to think. Then after a couple seconds, Izuku told him that as long as he would be in control, and that the symbiote wouldn't do anything bad while he was asleep, then he would accept the deal. And hearing this, the face nodded. And seeing this, Izuku shook the gooey hand. And shortly after that, Izuku woke up. And when he did, he looked at his hands. And when he did, he saw that his hands were completely black. And when he looked around his body was also completely covered in the goo. And when Izuku looked at his chest, he saw some white symbol on it. So he then got out of bed and walked in front of his mirror. And when he did, he saw that the giant symbol was actually a big white spider that went across his entire chest. And when he looked at his face, just like the rest of his body, his face was covered in the substance. But where his eyes were located, there were white eyes that looked similar to what he saw in his dream, but they were more rounder. Then before anything else could happen, Izuku heard in his head the voice that was in his dream, to stick out his hand and focus. And when he did, a black webbing came out from the back of his palm. And before anything else could happen, Inko walked into the room to tell Izuku to get ready for school. And when she saw that Izuku was covered in the suit, Venom immediately came off. And from what Inko saw, she assumed that Izuku had a quirk, so she immediately took him to the doctor to get his quirk registered. And from the testing, Izuku learned that not only does he now have a living suit that can shoot out webbing, but also while he's wearing it, it gives him superhuman abilities, such as superhuman speed, super strength, a healing factor, and super senses. But not only that, Izuku learned that the suit itself can repair itself after some time. And finally, while Izuku is wearing the suit, he's able to stick to any surface. But the downside is that he's extra weak to loud noises, fire, and he needs to eat a lot of food or he will get weak fast. So basically, this Venom has the same abilities as the Venom in the movie, but I decided to give him webs and make him look like Venom Spider-Man. And if I had to say his strength level, is about at 1 for all at 3%. And at the end of the testing, Izuku was given permission to name his new quirk. And after some thinking, Izuku named it Symbiote. So now we skip about a week, and by this point, Izuku still hasn't shown anyone besides his mom and the doctors that he has a Venom symbiote, because he really hasn't felt like he need to. And we are now at the start of the actual series, so Izuku's teacher just asked the class who wanted to go into the hero course. And when he said this, just about everyone raised their hands. And seeing this, Bakugo began to say how he was the best, and how no one would be better than a sidekick. But during the middle of his speech, Bakugo noticed that Izuku had his hand up. And when he noticed, he slammed his hand on Izuku's desk, and he fired an explosion, which made Izuku slam into the back wall. Then he told Izuku that he doesn't even have a chance, because unlike the rest of these rejects, Izuku doesn't even have a quirk. And feeling Izuku's anger, Venom began to spread across Izuku's body, starting with his hands. But before it became noticeable, Izuku stopped Venom, and he just took what Bakugo told him. So now we skip to after school, and while Izuku was writing down hero notes on the new Hero Mount Lady, Venom was asking Izuku why did he just take what Bakugo told him and not fight back. And Izuku told him that if he gave into his anger and fought every time someone made fun of him, then he wouldn't make a good hero. And before Venom could say anything back, Bakugo and some of his friends walked into the classroom, and after some talking, Bakugo grabbed Izuku's notebook that he had in his hands, then he blew it up and threw it out the window. And shortly after laughing at Izuku for some time, Bakugo and his group leave, leaving Izuku and Venom alone. Then after some time, Izuku was able to find his notebook in a pond with some fish sucking on it. Then after Izuku was able to dry up his book, the two began to walk home. And because they were both really hungry, Izuku took a shortcut. And eventually Izuku was able to get to a bridge, and he began to walk under it. And when he was halfway through the bridge, Izuku noticed a nearby sewer grate begin to shake. And seeing this, Izuku covered himself in venom, and he began to prepare himself. And after a couple seconds, the pile of sludge began to crawl out of the sewers. Then after a couple more seconds, the sludge villain was completely out of the sewers, and it began to look around. And after a couple seconds, it noticed Izuku. And when the villain noticed Izuku, it began to run towards him. And while he was running, the villain was swinging his arms to try to hit Izuku. But before the arms were able to hit, Izuku was able to jump out of the way. Then when Izuku landed, he tried to figure out a way to beat the villain, because all of his attacks wouldn't cause the villain any harm. And after a minute of just the sludge villain attacking Izuku, and Izuku dodging the attacks, Izuku was too slow, and he was able to get grabbed by the sludge villain. But before Izuku could find a way out, someone began to shout from the sewers. Then after a couple of seconds, a man jumped out of the sewers. And before Izuku was able to react, he and the villain got hit by a big blast of wind. And when the villain got hit by wind, it got blown away. And in the process, it lost his grip on Izuku. And before Izuku got blown away too, Izuku shot out webs from both of his hands at the walls of the tunnel, which allowed him to stay in place. And after around 10 seconds, the wind died down enough so that Izuku stopped swinging around. And when Izuku knew that it was safe, he let go of the webs, and he looked at the end of the tunnel. And when he did, he saw All Might. And seeing All Might, Izuku put back Venom, and he ran to his bag to get his notebook. And after Izuku got his notebook autographed, All Might told Izuku that this time was fine because he was using it in self-defense, but he really shouldn't use his quirk in public because he doesn't have a license. And because Izuku has Venom, he actually believes that he can become a hero, so he doesn't feel like he needs to ask All Might his question. So Izuku began to walk home again, while All Might put the villain into 2 different water bottles. So now we skip to the day of the UA entrance exams. And during the time between the sludge villain attack and the entrance exams, Izuku practiced using Venom more efficiently, and he and Venom have gotten more of a relationship because during the time, Venom has learned more about the differences between heroes and villains, and what makes a good hero. But even with all of this, Venom still mostly cares about his own survival rather than being a hero. And Izuku even did some physical training on his own because he felt like he shouldn't rely totally on Venom to be a hero. So Izuku physically is around this as he was in the canon before the exams. So now we actually jump to the day of the exams, and Izuku is currently standing outside the gates of UA. And after taking a deep breath, Izuku began to walk towards the exam room. But after a couple steps, Izuku tripped on a rock. And before Izuku could shoot out a web to save himself, someone grabbed his backpack. And when that person grabbed his bag, he realized that he stopped moving. And when he looked behind him, he saw a girl with brown hair, holding onto his bag. And after she put him back onto his feet, she gave him weight again. And after some talking, she leaves to go to the exam hall. And shortly after that, Izuku goes to the exam hall as well. And when the exam hall got filled, President Mike told all the examinees the events that will happen, and what the rules for each event were. So now we skip a couple of hours, and the first part of the entrance exam just finished. And everyone that passed, including Izuku, were waiting outside the exam area for the next part. And while Izuku was waiting, he and Venom were talking to each other in Izuku's mind. And they were discussing what Izuku's plan should be to get as many points as possible. But before they were actually able to come up with a concrete plan, President Mike appeared on top of a tower. And he shouted that the test is now starting, because in the real world there aren't any countdowns. Then right after he said that, the giant doors leading into the fake city opened up. And when they opened completely, everyone began to run through. And seeing this, Izuku covered himself in the symbiote, and he began to run with everyone else. And when Izuku met his first robot, which was a 2-pointer, Izuku shot out a web from one of his hands, which hit the robot in the torso. Then Izuku grabbed the web and he began to swing the robot around. And after a couple seconds, Izuku slammed the robot into another 2-pointer, giving Izuku 4 points. And for the rest of the test, Izuku did this, or he just ran up to the robots and he hit them in the chest where their cores were located, which instantly destroyed the robot. And by the final couple minutes of the exam, Izuku had 37 robot points. And before Izuku could get any more points, the teachers released the 0-pointers. And when everyone saw the 0-pointers, they ran away, Izuku included. But before Izuku could go too far, Izuku heard someone yell from pain. And when Izuku turned around, he saw the girl that stopped him earlier from tripping earlier. And some of the rubble from the nearby buildings fell into her leg. And the 0-pointer was coming closer to her. And seeing this, Izuku turned around and he was about to run towards her. But before he could take a step, Venom moved his legs, which made him stop. And Venom then asked why did Izuku want to run head-on into a dangerous situation for someone they hardly knew. And after hearing this, Izuku told him because that's the way a hero does. Then Izuku began to run. And Venom didn't manipulate Izuku's body further because he doesn't want to get onto Izuku's bad side because he still needs him. And he also wants to see what will happen. And when Izuku got to the girl, he began to shoot out webs at the rubble that was on top of her leg, then throw it to the side. outside. And after around 30 seconds, the robot was right in front of the two, and Izuku had the girl mostly free. So Izuku quickly scooped up the girl and he began to run away. And after around 30 seconds, Izuku was about a block away from the robot, and the second he stopped running, an alarm rang throughout the entire fake city. Then when it was done, it was announced that the exams are now completely over. And hearing this, Izuku put down the girl, and after a bit of talking, the girl stumbled off. And when she was gone, Izuku and Venom left to go home. So now we skip a couple days, and Izuku got his results by letter. And when he opened the letter, he saw a video message from All Might, who told him that he did good on the entrance exam, and that he actually tied for first place in the final part of the exams, with an examinee by the name of Bakugo, with a total of 77 points. Because not only did he get 37 points from beating up the robots, but he got an additional 40 points for running head on to save the girl. And once All Might was done talking, he said, "Welcome to UA." Then right after he said that, the video message turned off. So now we skip to the first day of UA. And before this, Bakugo was told that Izuku had gone to UA as well, because he was told that he was tied with Izuku by All Might. And when Bakugo questioned Izuku on this, Izuku just told him that he was able to get strong enough to catch up to him. So now we actually skip to the first day of school. And Izuku is currently standing outside the front door of Class 1A. And when Izuku walked in, the first people he saw were Bakugo and the guy with glasses Izuku recognized from the entrance exams. And they were arguing about Bakugo having his feet on his desk. And seeing this, Izuku just walked past them and he went to an empty desk. And after a couple seconds, someone walked up to Izuku. It was the girl that he helped during the exams. So the two then gave each other their name, and after that they began to talk. But after a couple minutes of talking, they noticed a sleeping bag in the doorway. And when the entire class noticed this, they shut up. And when they did, a man started to climb out of the sleeping bag. And when he got out of it, he said that it took them way too long for them to get quiet. And he tells them that they will need to work on that. Then he tells them to get dressed into their PE clothes, and afterward meet him in the field outside. And once everyone had gone to the field, Aizawa gave Bakugo a ball, and he told him to throw it as hard as he could while using his quirk. And hearing this, Bakugo pulled back his arm and he threw it. But right before the ball left his hand, Bakugo fired an explosion, which propelled the ball even farther. And when the ball hit the ground, a number appeared on Aizawa's phone, which was 705.2 meters. Then he showed the class. Then Aizawa told the class that they will be seeing how strong they are and how strong their quirks are, because at UA they only can accept the best of the best. Then he told them that the person in last place will get kicked out of school. And once he said that, the test began. And hearing this, Izuku decided that he should probably take this seriously, so he covered himself in the Venom symbiote. And once he got completely wrapped around it, everyone started to stare at him, because they've never seen a quirk just wrap around a person like that. But the person that was the most surprised was Bakugo, because he had no idea it was a Venom symbiote. And seeing this, Bakugo ran at Izuku shouting how the hell did he do that. But right before he got to Izuku, Aizawa wrapped Bakugo in his scarf, and he activated his quirk on him so that Bakugo couldn't use his. And from this display, everyone was able to recognize him as a pro hero Eraserhead. Then before Bakugo could get out of Eraser's scarf, Aizawa told him that he was on strike one for right now, and for the time being there won't be any second chances, so he should stop before he gets completely kicked out of school, without any hopes of returning. And hearing this, Bakugo stopped, and shortly after that the test began. So for the 50-meter dash, Izuku ran as fast as he could, with him getting a score of around 4.5 seconds. Then for the long jump, Izuku began with a running start. Then when he got to the box, he jumped as high as he could, and he had enough strength to completely jump over the box. Then for grip strength, Izuku got one of the highest scores, since Shoji got a slightly higher score than him, by just a couple pounds. So now it's time for the ball throw. And when it was Izuku's turn, Izuku shot out a web and he aimed at the ball. Then Izuku grabbed the web and he began to spin around, giving the ball momentum. Then when the ball stopped dropping, and it was going as fast as he could make it, he stopped. But before the ball could stop, Izuku threw the ball as far as he could. And when the ball hit the ground, the number that appeared on Aizawa's phone was 321 meters. But even with this, because Izuku got good scores throughout the entire event, he was in the middle, while in last place there was Mineta, who after the results were shown was taken to the principal's office. And after that, the class never saw him again. So now we skip to the next day, and when it was time for the hero course, instead of Aizawa walking into the room, it was All Might in his Golden Age outfit. And after the class was done freaking out over All Might being in their classroom, All Might told them to put on their hero costumes and to meet him on ground B. So now it's time for me to explain Izuku's hero outfit. And because of Venom itself is a costume, Izuku doesn't really need one. But when Izuku is in his quote-unquote hero costume, Izuku is wearing a full body outfit that is made out of a fireproof material, so that if Izuku is stuck in a fire, he should be fine. So now we skip to when All Might sees everyone in the hero costumes, and he tells them that they will be doing heroes versus villains exercise, and he then explains the rules. And at the end of the explanation, he puts everyone into groups of two, with Izuku being paired with Ochako. He then pulled team letters out of two boxes, and he got Izuku and Ochako's team for the heroes, and Bakugo and Ida's team for the villains. And when the matchup was revealed, the rest of the class goes to a room to watch the match, while Izuku and Ochako came up with a plan to get the bomb. And while they were coming up with a plan, Ida asked Bakugo what was Izuku's quirk, and what were his weaknesses. But hearing this, Bakugo just walked off and he turned off his comm, leaving Ida to take care of the bomb. And after a couple minutes, the exercise began. And when Izuku and Ochako got into the building, they ran until they were about to turn a corner. But before they were able to turn, Izuku noticed a piece of yellow hair started to come out of the corner, so he pushed Ochako out of the way. And right when he did this, this, Bakugo jumped out of the corner and he fired an explosion, which Izuku was able to mostly dodge, with a bit of explosion hitting him in the arm. And when the heat made contact with Izuku's arm where the venom was instantly returned back to normal, and the venom in that area that was left is moving around and wiggling, trying to return back to normal. And seeing this, Bakugo pieced together that Izuku's quirk must be weak to heat and fire, so he began a rapid fire explosion at Izuku, which Izuku was able to mostly dodge, with him getting hit only a couple times, in small areas. And while this was going on, Izuku shouted for Ochako to continue on ahead while he distracts Bakugo, and hearing this, she began to run. But before she was completely gone, Bakugo turned around and he went to attack her. But before Bakugo could do anything, Izuku shot out webs from both of his hands which hit Bakugo in the back. And before he was able to react, Izuku slammed Bakugo into a wall of the hallway, which allowed Ochako to continue running down the hallway. And when she was gone, the two began to actually fight, with Bakugo mainly using his explosions to fight Izuku, while Izuku tried his best to avoid them just in time. And his plan was to continue the fight to buy time for Ochako to find the bomb. And after a couple minutes, Izuku was able to avoid a right hook from Bakugo, and Izuku grabbed Bakugo's arm and he slammed him into the ground. Then right after Bakugo got back up, he had enough, so he pointed an arm at Izuku, and his other hand was beginning to move towards the pin that was on his glove. But when he got close to the pin, All Might in the speaker shouts for Bakugo to not pull the pin. But Bakugo, hearing this, just began to laugh. Then he pulled the pin, and once Izuku saw this, he shouted in his mind for Venom to get into his suit. And the second Bakugo pulled the pin, a giant explosion erupted from his glove, and it began to rush towards Izuku. And almost immediately, Venom was able to react, and it began to crawl into Izuku's costume, making Izuku go back to his original costume. But right after around half of the venom got into the costume, the explosion got to Izuku and it hit him head on, completely burning the pieces of venom that were outside the costume. And when the smoke settled, Izuku was on the ground and he seemed to be unconscious. And when Bakugo saw him, he walked over to him. And when Bakugo was standing directly above Izuku, Izuku covered himself in the remaining venom that was still in his suit, and he punched Bakugo in the gut as hard as he could. But because Izuku only had half of venom, he was only around half strength, so Bakugo only got flown off his feet. And before Bakugo was able to get up, Izuku began to web at Bakugo, with his arms pinned to the ground. And after a couple of shots, Izuku decided that was enough, since he really needs to reserve his energy for Venom to repair himself. So Izuku then began to run away to find Ochako. And once Izuku started running, Ochako in her comm told Izuku where she and the bomb were located. And after a minute, Izuku was able to get to the room. But right before he was able to get into the room, Izuku saw flashes of fire from behind him. And after a couple seconds, he was able to realize that it was Bakugo who was able to get free from his restraints, and he was flying towards Izuku. But before he was actually able to get to Izuku was able to make it into the room. And when he made it, he closed the door as fast as he could, and he locked the door. And once it was locked, he webbed it up, making it even harder for Bakugo to get in. And when Bakugo got to the door, he fired explosions to try to break down the door. Meanwhile, when Izuku got into the room, he saw Ochako on one side of the room, and Ida and the bomb on the other. And seeing this, Izuku ran towards the bomb. And seeing this, Ida was about to run towards the bomb, in order to move it away. But the second Ida turned to run towards the bomb, Izuku shot out two webs with Ida in the calves. And when they landed, Izuku pulled on Ida as hard as he could, which made Ida trip. And the second that Ida lost footing and landed on his face, Izuku swung Ida into the wall. And the second he landed, Ida began to run towards the bomb again. But before he was able to get to the bomb, Ochako was able to get to it and make contact. And the second she made contact, Bakugo finally burst down the door, making the door fall to the ground. And when the door hit the ground, All Might in the speakers announced that the hero team won. And a couple minutes later, the two groups make it to the rest of the class. And this is really the what if. I hope you enjoyed this part, and I hope you enjoyed the series moving forward. And I hope to see you next time on Something Z.